Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the NRG Pioneer 5K here from Fort Wayne. I'm your host, Mason. Sure, my co-host, Devin.
Hey, we're back, ready to see some more Pioneer action. We get a nice one lined up for you. Some decks that one deck we haven't seen before yet, and this should be an interesting one. There's been a lot of mono green in the event, but obviously the most powerful deck, the most popular deck, nothing too surprising there. But trying to showcase some more fringe decks, more interesting decks, and I think we got a couple of those
Yeah,
lined
it's
up
going to
for
be
you
exciting
today.
to see those here in just 1 second. So let's get ready to throw that down to the feature match area as soon as they are ready. And it looks like they are. So we have 5-color Niv versus the mono white aggro deck. So Kris here versus Logan. And it looks like, okay. I thought Kris was doing the classic. I'm gonna mulligan and see what the top two cards. We're just taking the time on the draw step. So, Devin, have you played much with the 5-color Niv deck?
Not a ton. I played a couple leagues with it just to get it under my belt. I want to make sure a little bit of everything for testing for for Atlanta. But yeah, this is a deck that is there. Sometimes we usually see a companion here. There's actually no companion, no Gigantha, no Yorion. But this is an interesting matchup, specifically the card Thalia, Guardian of Threven, really punishing the Bring to Light because it makes Bring to Light cost an additional mana. And if you're playing a non-creature spell off of the Bring to Light, that's another mana as well. But this should be a pretty interesting matchup.
Yeah, we're gonna see a Sylvan Caryatid here
Love
playing
it.
from the 5-color Niv deck, fixing the mana, and just got a snap block here on the Hopeful Initiate. Kris not afraid of any combat tricks. If you got him, you got him. And we are seeing, the 5-color Niv deck plays a lot of the Triomes in order to facilitate this sort of mana base. And so you don't always see too much plays in the other turn, but Sylvan Caryatid helps with that. And we see Thalia's Lieutenant coming down and growing both these creatures.
Yeah, we saw a missed land drop from Logan last turn, so not able to deploy the lieutenant. I mean, maybe wanted to play the initiate anyways, but yeah, this is a decent turn for Logan here. But we are able to binding the hopeful initiate because if that attacked, it would have gotten a counter from the attack because the bodyguard has more power. Now we can actually attack past the Caryatid. Probably don't want to block that one now. And then we're going to go for a growth spiral, maybe trying to hit another untapped land to be able to maybe cast another Leyline Binding. But yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of Triomes here to be able to facilitate not only binding, but it is a 5-color deck. You're trying to cast the card Niv-Mizzet. So want to make sure you are able to cast that on curve. But in the presence of no Thalia, if we got a Bring to Light here for Kris Ward, we could see some fireworks, maybe a Niv here.
Yeah, and it looks like we do have Valky coming down. On the front side, normally we see as Tybalt the Cosmic Imposter, but here it's going to come in and do its kind of as printed mode where it takes a creature and then can become that creature. Looks like we're going to take Adeline, but we have Brutal Cathar, Brave the Elements, and double Thalia's Lieutenant in the hand for Logan. So that's going to be important, something that Kris can play around. And for us as the casters, makes it a little easier.
Yeah, very nice that Kris was able to take that Adeline because that's probably the best card that Logan would have been able to cast there. Not only pumping the Thalia's Lieutenant on the enters the battlefield trigger, but also the token that it creates also pumps the Lieutenant again. Now there is another Lieutenant, and this is kind of a good line for Logan because you get to go, play the Lieutenant, have two creatures that attack past the Caryatid and hold up the Brave the Elements. So this is, maybe protection against something like an Abrupt Decay or a Vanishing Verse. But we see a copy of Extinction Event in Kris's hands. So you could even see something like maybe Removal Spell on the 1-drop. Okay,
Yeah.
it looks like we went for a block with Valky activate, so we're going to force the Brave out that way, I think.
Yeah, it looks like we activated before blocking. And so Logan went pro-white and just pushed through 7 damage. Yeah, we're going to put Adeline on top. That is, a Valky pretending to be Adeline, which is a 2/4 right now, which is, kind of big. And funny enough, I believe it also copies the CMC exactly. So it is now an odd card. So it will survive this Extinction Event if we name even, which is, I believe, what we're double checking here at the players to make sure that Valky is an exact copy and not just a text block. Extinction Event, though, a really sweet sweeper. You choose even or odd on the number, and all the creatures with the mana value of the number of the even or odd are answered. So, for example, you name odd, all the 1s, the 3s, and the 5s are going to go. You name even, the 2s, the 4s, and the 6.
Yeah, and the really nice thing about Extinction Event, especially in this matchup, it gets around Brave the Elements because it doesn't target, it's a sweeper, it doesn't target the creature. So compared to your traditional removal spells like a Leyline Binding or an Abrupt Decay, it gets around that, which is Really, really nice because that's a card that the mono white deck has obviously has 4 copies of, and we're going beatdowns. That thing's got vigilance too. Can even play a little bit of offense, a little bit of defense.
Yeah. Chris is like, hey, I know I took your Adeline. Can I take your tokens too, real quick? Thanks. Take 3 on the beatdown deck now. Let me see a triumph from Chris here of the Raugrin variety. And looks like we do have
Kind of a weird draw here from Chris. This isn't usually how the Niv deck plays out. Just hard, hard drawing the Valky and then also just taking the Adeline. This is kind of funny.
It's really funny. And it's also so awkward for Logan too, because Logan's like, well, this Brutal Cathar is kind of good, but if I do it and Chris just kills it, then the Adeline's gone again, or maybe some other threat that I actually want to have instead, So kind of hard to, be Brutal Catharing here. And also just isn't that much power compared to something like playing your Thalios Lieutenant.
Yeah, and I think I'm pretty sure that I saw this correctly. I think Chris might have a copy of, let me pull up the name here. If I saw it correctly, the Selfless Glyphweaver, which is usually a card. Now, this is kind of a weird card because if you look at the front half of the card, 3 mana, 2/3, maybe not the. Why would you put this card in your 5 color mid range Niv to Light deck? But the cool thing about it is the back half, because when you cast Bring to Light, you can actually cast the back half of this for free, this is what you're playing it for. So Deadly Vanity is choose a creature or planeswalker, then blow up everything else. So that's what you're playing it for. The ability to kind of bring to light into that can be a very, very powerful interaction.
100%. And an awkward one to draw, but with your big deck, it's normally not that huge of a problem. And we do see the house of cards kind of go weird ways. So now we Brutal Cathar, it's daytime, Valky's underneath, and then the Adeline back to our hand. And we see Niv-Mizzet Reborn slammed. We have the mana for it. So reveal the top 10, and we can put a card per guild in it. So far, it's all shocklands. We got to bring the light.
I don't know what that promo is, but it's not a gold card, I guess.
I think it's a 3-color card. It's like one of the charms or something. Sometimes these decks do have cards that don't quite get hit.
Okay.
Yeah. It also might just be a growth spiral. You can only take 1 card per color combo, so it might have just been another promotional version of that. But yeah, that Niv-Mizzet Reborn, 5 mana, 6/6, did put 9 lands on the bottom of the deck, so that's kind of nice. But only drew 1 card there. It's not the most exciting Niv, but also that's kind of the thing with this deck, right, Devin? It's just so big.
Right, it's basic, Muldrifter with extra steps, as we like to call it. But the thing is, getting, even though the Niv only hit 1 card, I would argue that it probably hit the best card, right? Bring to Light is the card that you want to hit because it's the one that gives you the most amount of options on the next turn. So depending on how Logan plays his turn, Logan is aware of the Bring to Light, is aware that it likely can get a sweeper, so kind of has to play with that knowledge, and also the fact that you just have a 6/6 on the battlefield. And if you do something like, say, Brutal Cathar the Niv, and your opponent has a removal spell on the Brutal Cathar, and you get another Niv-Mizzet trigger, that could spell the end of the game for Logan here as well. So kind of has to maneuver this game in such a way. Now, Chris is at 11. Now, with something like a Brave the Elements, the Niv and the token are both white creatures. So you could see, if we do a quick math, not quite lethal this turn, it's only 6 damage, but maybe can try to put some creatures onto the battlefield and maybe, try to set up for lethal. But this is going to be a tough one for Logan here.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And it looks like Logan is kind of tanking. I think Logan has a main deck copy of Thalia Heretic Cathar. That's one we've seen in the sideboard a lot today, but very good against this deck that has, basically no basic lands. Has, up forest, up plains, I think like an island. But besides that, for the most part, it's just like 27 non-basic lands. And kind of like, well, the Niv-Mizzet's already down, so what am I supposed to do? Looks like we are going to lead with Thalia's Lieutenant instead to kind of grow the team up. And then activate a Mutavault in response to the trigger, so that gets bigger for future turns.
Right, so the Mutavault's going to get a little bit bigger. Now, the Mutavault is not a white creature, so if there's something like Brave the Elements, that one does not get protection. So if we do some math here, now we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 power. Chris, do we have light totals wrong? Chris, it's 7.
I think we used the Brave earlier in the game to stop the block from the Adeline.
Right. Okay. So, you could see something if the Brave the Elements is drawn off of the top that could potentially present lethal. But the other thing that we have to consider is that Selfless Glyphweaver in the hand. Now, Chris, I believe that card, I want to say it's
Dreadbore.
Quad black. Yeah.
The Glyphweaver
the other card, it's quad black. Now, If we take a look at the Triomes, I don't believe we have 4 black. I think it also costs 8 mana, so even if we had an untapped land, we wouldn't be able to cast it that turn. And we're actually just going to run it out here.
Yeah. Awkwardly enough, a white creature. Super important here. We're looking at Brave the Elements math.
Yeah, very, very true. For a 5-color deck, having 3 white creatures on the battlefield, if Brave the Elements is drawn, we're getting pretty close. Now, the Brutal Cathar was answered, so not quite lethal, right? Because we have 5, and then plus the 1 from Lieutenant. That's only 6, so not quite lethal if there's a Brave drawn. But it looks like I think the hand is Adeline and Thalia, so we'll have to see how Logan plays this.
100%. And it looks like Logan
chat's actually bring up a good point. The Valky should be in play.
Oh yeah, Valky should be. It should have been in play, and actually should have looked at the hand. And I believe the Thalia was there before, so work at the judge on down there to take care of that. Pretty easy to miss that, obviously, as we see here, us missing it as well when I've been playing the game. And that does matter, not only because as we see here tapping the mana, Tibalt Cosmic Imposter could be cast for 7, and that is not allowed to be happening.
Well, for the land, but also enter the battlefield tap because the Thalia too. But yeah, no, I agree.
Oh, sure, yeah, good point. Looks like we have figured out the Valky situation. Well, the judge figured this one out here for a second. Yeah, we're getting judge involved. Rewind. So let's hop here in the booth and let's talk about this Niv-Mizzet deck, which is so sick because this is one of the sweeter decks, and it's 3-0 so far in our Pioneer 5K today.
Right. We talked about the Enigmatic Incarnation deck last round, had tons and tons of one-ofs. This is another one kind of similar to that vein where it has a lot of tutor targets because it's playing 4 copies of Bring to Light and also wants to try and split up the gold mana cost to make sure that it always has, enough stuff to hit off of the Niv. So yeah, just a really good kind of value-oriented deck. You could call it it's a mid-range deck at heart. But yeah, also the other thing that worth noting is that even though it's a mid-range deck, the card Niv-Mizzet puts a lot of pressure on you, and also is just really hard to get around because it's just this massive flying body. Can also pressure stuff like Karn the Great Creator. But yeah, we see the Niv deck doing very, very well, and we'll have to see how this game plays out.
Yeah, I agree. It's gonna be really interesting, and I think it's one of those things too where it looks like a deck that's gonna maybe either get hard stomped or hard stomp the aggro decks, because you can look at it 2 ways, right? It has all the answer spells like we mentioned, but also has all the Triome. So like you kind of go third, right? A lot of the time if you're ever on the draw. But it kind of is a lot even when things play out like that. They don't really always quite mesh exactly as we think they will in our head here. The players are kind of figuring out exactly what we're going to do with the Valky still. But regardless of that, yeah, I think the Niv-Mizzet deck is a really cool part of Pioneer and something that's very unique to this format's identity.
Right. Yeah. The fact that we have kind of 2 different 5-color decks that have a lot of tutor targets is there's a lot of different variety in these decks too. They're not necessarily trying to do the same thing. You have the Incarnation deck that's trying to set up, Fires plus Incarnation, have this big turn with the Leyline Binding or things like that. We're trying to kind of almost like a combo turn of sorts. And then you have the Niv deck where it's just removal, play a big thing. So these decks, while being 5-color decks that have a lot of tutor targets, they play out very differently as well, which is nice.
100%, yeah. And so it is funny though that there are the 2 5-color decks with all these different targets and removal, and they are so disparate in how they look and how they're kind of constructed. It is a unique quirk of, I think, Pioneer, where in formats like Modern, we don't even really have 5-color decks for the most part. We have creativity and that's it. But yeah, it is kind of only this format. And if you feels like, in Modern, the 5-color decks are just 5 colors of Leyline Binding, right? So we do have a lot of 5-color decks right now in Magic, but they're not really 5-color decks in the way that this deck is. And even, the Fires deck is like splashing black a little bit. This deck has every piece of the color pie.
Right, yeah, a lot of the modern 5-color decks, like you alluded to, really are just, blue-white with Leyline Binding or something along those lines. So you can't really call them 5-color decks, even though they produce 5 colors of mana or can have the ability to produce 5 colors of mana. But these are kind of true 5-color decks because the mana is a little bit worse in Pioneer. You kind of have to work for a little bit harder. We saw the Nylea's Presence, which is a way to turn on Leyline Binding because you don't always draw the correct number of Triomes. you see in Modern with fetch lands, you always have the ability to cast a Leyline Binding on turn 2 because you can fetch Triome, fetch the other Triome on turn 2, which gives you all 5 colors, but you're kind of at the mercy of your draw step in Pioneer because you don't have the ability to fetch those lands. So you kind of want to, with these 5-color decks, you want to split up your Triomes to make sure that you kind of cover all of your bases and make it more likely you're able to cast the Binding, because Leyline Binding is a very, very powerful card if you can kind of, pay the deck building cost. And the cost is a little bit more of a thing in Pioneer than is in Modern for sure.
100%. Let's take a moment here. Let's talk about a card that might be good for the mono white deck, because we keep talking about Soldier of the Pantheon and how players are going to cut it. Recruitment Officer is that card they're going to cut it for. That's a new card from Brothers War. It's white for a 2-1. We're going to have it jump up here on screen for you in just a second. White with a 2-1, so already kind of a lot like all the other 1-drops in our deck, but this one has 3 in a white. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You can put a creature card from among them into your hand and put the rest in the bottom of your deck in a random order. So what do you think about this, Devin, for the mono white deck?
It kind of depends on how relevant you feel that the Soldier of the Pantheon ability is. Because as we talked, remember that the Atarka red matchup that we saw, specifically the Soldier of the Pantheon looked really good, being able to shut down something like a Burning Tree Emissary. So if you expect the ability on Soldier of the Pantheon to be a little bit better, then maybe I could see that. But this one is, against something like Rakdos or a deck that's trying to grind you out of resources, the activated ability on this card is really, really powerful in those matchups where you want to make sure that you can trade you want to give yourself as many 2-for-1s as you possibly can, and this is kind of that offers that for you. So I could see it being a player for sure.
Yeah, the white deck, we talked about earlier how the white and the Gruul deck are decks that are really strong, really proactive, but they don't give you a lot of agency and don't give you a lot of looks at cards. You kind of get what you get, and often your random 7 cards on what you draw for a turn, you can piece together a win. But with something like this, you could actually, you start to flood out a little bit. You have to hold the elements. All right, end of turn, look, okay, here's, Brutal Cathar. With Thalia's Lieutenant, I can really sculpt my game plan around activating this card. So it'll be interesting to see how many versions of this players want to play versus Soldier, because like you did mention, multicolor cards do matter. And even in matchups like Rakdos, right, they have Blood Tithe Harvester, Dreadbore, and maybe other future red-black cards that want to play. Having protection from that is a really powerful keyword. It's easy to undersell how much protection in one life matters until you really get into the games and you kind of see it happen.
Yeah, and even the one game that we get to see on camera which was the Soldier of the Pantheon versus Burning Tree Emissary. Part of the appeal of the red deck, that specific red deck, was Burning Tree Emissary, allowing you to have these really fast starts. And when you have the protection from multicolored, being able to shut down one of those attackers, it really makes those Burning Tree Emissary draws look pretty mopey, to be honest with you.
There. Let's talk about another card though on the other end of the aggro spectrum. For Brothers Work here, as we're still getting ruling figured out. Let's talk about Obstinate Baloth, because that's a big reprint for Pioneer. So if you haven't played against Obstinate Baloth before, it's kind of fallen out of vogue in Modern. But it's 4 mana for a 4/4 that when it ETBs, you gain 4 life. And if it's discarded from your hand from an opponent's effect, you get to put it in the battlefield for free. So what do you think about this card in the context of Pioneer?
Well, first and foremost, I would like to say that I'm a little upset that they made it an uncommon. I wish that we had shown the rare version, because, shout out to my homie. I played this card a lot back in the day. I'm not trying to sound old, but I mean, I am old. So, but I do think this card is somewhat interesting for the green decks in Pioneer. The only thing that I will question is, the green devotion decks, their sideboard slots are pretty tight with regards to how many card targets they want, and especially with the new set coming out, there's a lot more options and appealing options that they might want to play. So I do agree that this card has a place in the format, maybe more so against Rakdos than Mono Red, just the ability to discard to Liliana and get a free creature onto the battlefield. But it's tough for me to find kind of room in that sideboard. So maybe looking at something like the Gruul boat deck, maybe if that deck has a tough aggro matchup, you could slot something like this in pretty effectively.
Yeah, 100%. And we do see, we talked about Modern Green so much of it's like picking the thing for the weekend, right? So we see 3 weeks ago, we had a bunch of Boats main deck. And this weekend, we have a bunch of Lovestruck Beasts main deck. And maybe there's going to be a weekend where you're like, I think Burn and Red-Black are going to be really good. And they're all on Liliana's. And it's like, well, this is the time. Pull them out of the box, get your rare copies, stick them in your deck, and boom, you play those in that sort of slot. And that is the small customization things that we see in Magic that make it such a cool and unique game.
Yeah, and we kind of joked about this a little earlier, but when you have Kiora in your deck, you can kind of justify anything with 4 power, right?
Yeah, especially with the 4 life too. Like, it isn't the best in the world against the aggro decks, But it kind of does something. I'm gonna throw it over to another card. So the middle spectrum, we've done aggro, we've done the ramp. Let's look at a mid-range card potentially, and that's Misery Shadow. So this is a card that's getting a lot of conversation. So Misery Shadow is 1 in a black for a shade 2/2. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead, and then has for a single colorless mana, activate, get +1/+1 until the end of turn. What do you think of this card, Devin?
So I like this card a lot. I think I remember watching, it was Misplaced Ginger stream. He was talking about this card potentially in the Rakdos mid-range deck, and maybe didn't think it was quite as powerful as Blood Tithe Harvester, which I agree with. I think Harvester is maybe a little bit better in the Rakdos mid-range deck. But a deck that I think that you could maybe play this in is something, there's been this mono black devotion deck that I've seen pop up from time to time, which kind of has, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, Underworld Connections, all of these like these old school kind of the when Mono Black Devotion was kind of running rampant in standard. And I could see this being a nice little inclusion. It doesn't provide a ton of devotion, but it is a mana sink, and also the ability to exile creatures is very important, especially against stuff like Old Growth Troll and Cavalier of Thorns.
100% there. It's gonna be really interesting to see how this card, if it spawns anything. I think a lot of players, the snap comparison they have these days is Dothly Voidwalker, right? Where they're like, oh, it's like a Dothly where it does that sort of graveyard ability, which is kind of true. It does sort of control things like Old Growth Troll and Cavalier of Thorns, like you mentioned. A lot of other weird things that come up mattering, like against Grease Fang. Sometimes they can't stay alive at Grease Fang, so now you have this to stop it. But it's going to be interesting to see exactly how it ends up interacting in the format and how it ends up playing out.
For sure. Now, there was one card that I wanted to kind of bring up here, see if we can talk about this. We're on the mid-range spectrum here. I want to talk about Gix Yawgmoth Praetor if we have a little bit of time. So this is a card that is black, and a colorless for a 3/3. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay a life if they do draw a card. And then it's got some expensive ability where you discard X cards, flip the top X, you may play lands and cast spells without paying their mana cost. That's not going to come up too often, but what do you think about this card just in terms of playing it for the first ability?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as maybe something that you can play at the top of like an aggressive mid-range curve deck, like you mentioned there. Like maybe something that has like a good amount of 1-drop still, but there's 1-drop scale, like now the Ebon Legion or Sleeper Agent. So that's really good there. Also, it reminds me a lot of the black aggro decks we saw at the beginning of Pioneer with Inverter and stuff. Now those decks have fallen off a little bit, and some of their problems aren't solved by this. But one of the problems they did have is they kind of got out mid-range and out value by things like Rakdos. So having this even as a sideboard option is something you bring in when you have like maybe 12 2/1s and just sort of, throw your creatures at your opponent, refuel, and then redeploy and just kind of keep that barrage coming. It's something that is kind of appealing in a card like this. We are going to go back to the floor. So we had a head judge ruling. We had a whole conversation. We're leaving it as it lies. Just too much has happened, and we've gone too far in the game. Too much to rewind and sort of maintain game state in a way that all the players are happy. So looks like we're just going to have Logan reveal the Adeline to the opponent, which is a little bit of the trying to fix it before the judge got involved happening. And then now we're going to see a bring to light, grab Supreme Verdict, cast Supreme Verdict, and then the Glyphweaver that was in play has that indestructible text that we joked about before, mattering a whole bunch here. Sacrifice this.
Wow, I didn't. Can't say I'd ever see that happening, where the front side of Selfless Glyphweaver actually having text. Yeah, we, like you said, we definitely joked about that. That's awesome that came up. Just being able to sacrifice it, give your stuff indestructible, and keep the Niv in play. Very, very heads up from Kris there.
Yep, and the Valky. So it looks like we're gonna be picking up our cards here. Kris has won game number 1. Let's try and pull up Kris' Ward deck list here and see what the Niv-Mizzet player has. But yeah, Valky came back down there, took the Adeline and kind of thread and lethal in the next turn. Something that Logan's deck just can't really come back from. So Kris' sideboard is 2 Dovin's Veto, 2 Extinction Event, 2 Go Blank, 2 Camball, console allocation, 2 Render Volley, 2 Rest in Peace, a Garruk the Cursed Huntsman, Clothis God of Destiny, and Dragon Lord Dromica. Big one. Devin, what do you like in this matchup?
Well, I got to pull up Garruk Cursed Huntsman. I don't think it's going to come into this matchup, but what I want to look at here is I want to look at the 2 copies of Rending Volley. I think those are slam dunks. Being able to, 1 mana removal spell, kill a white creature or a blue creature. There's a lot of those in the mono white deck, so those are slam dunks for me. Extinction Event, I think, is something that Kris definitely wants access to more sweepers. The white deck kind of presents a lot of draws where you have to have the sweeper on curve. So just having the more ability to do that on curve seems very, very important. Outside of those, though, I don't know if I want to go towards this Dromoka. It is expensive, but it is also very hard for the mono white deck to answer. What do you think about Dromoka here?
Yeah, Dromoka's a curious one to me. I almost wonder what matchup it's for if it's not this one, but I agree that it's like so much mana and we can't tutor it that it's like, huh, it can't be countered, so maybe it's for the grindy matchups, and we bring it in there. But I have to think that even though maybe it's not the best card here, you just have a couple of cards, like you mentioned, that are maybe just not the strongest things in the world in this matchup. Like, for example, I know like Nahiri is just a card that is like fine, but not great. And so maybe if you get to that sort of late game stage, Dromoka can stabilize in a position it can't. So we might see that one come in. But the rest of those, I'm kind of snap with you there on throwing those into the deck. Let's see what Logan has in the mono white sideboard. Might have some cards for the grinding matchup themselves. And we have 4 winning announcement, 3 rest in peace, 3 Decade Zone, 2 portable hole, and 2 extraction specialists. So noteworthy, the extraction specialists that were in the main deck for Harlan Fear earlier today are in the sideboard here, and the Thalias have swapped. So, Devin, what do you like in this matchup?
Well, give me those extraction specials. I think those are pretty awesome in this matchup. There is a lot of removal spells. The one thing I will mention is one of Chris's removal spells is Vanishing Verse, so the exile on that could be pretty important against the specialist, so something to keep in mind. But, against stuff like Supreme Verdict and Abrupt Decay and the non-exile removal spells, that card is very, very good in this matchup. And also, again, I think the 4 copies of Winning Announcement I like quite a bit. Just being able to kind of I'm not going to say keep pace with the amount of card advantage the Niv deck is providing, but something, if the game is not going your way, can kind of dig you out of a hole a little bit, dig you maybe towards a Brave the Elements that you need to get through those last points of damages. So I think the 4 announcements and the 2 specialists, the rest of it, I think I'm not as inclined on.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too with these aggro decks, right? Is you don't want to over sideboard, and 5 or 6 cards is kind of often the maximum you can go unless you're exchanging threats for hyper specific threats that dodge something, right? So you kind of have to keep your deck core the same, despite maybe wanting to have more cards for a matchup. And it looks like the players are resolving mulligans. So let's hop on down to the table and see what's going on there. As it looks like Logan snap moles, probably a no land situation there, or maybe all lands. Either one really easy to figure out. Kris, on the other hand, it looks like it has a pretty reasonable mix of lands and spells, and that looks like someone that's keeping to me.
Yeah. Now, as far as opening hands are concerned and what we're kind of looking for, I mean, Logan's deck is kind of pretty straightforward here. We're looking for some cheap creatures. Obviously, Thalia is probably the best option for Logan on turn 2, as we talked about, just being able to, mess with Chris's curve quite a bit. Really can kind of make Kris stumble a little bit, especially against something like a Bring to Light that has to get a sweeper if you're that far behind. So looking for just an aggressive curve, maybe a winning announcement, but that maybe I don't even know on the play if would you rather have winning announcement or Adeline on turn 3? Probably Adeline, just to get a little bit more pressure. And then jokingly, as I've kind of talked with Claudio in the past, who plays a lot of this Niv deck, you just kind of have to mulligan to Sylvan Caryatid, even though it's a little maybe not necessarily the whole of it, but best card in
Sure.
the deck.
But we do have nothing on turn 1 for both players, but then Luminarch Asper on turn 2. One of the big things with the Niv deck is the mono white deck is it just has so many good, powerful 2-drops. And we do see the Sylvan Caryatid from Kris Ward here. Same school of thought as Claudio, probably has seen some Claudio content. And then we have Thalia here to Cathar coming down on turn number 3.
And this Thalia, kind of a beating, because as you alluded to, there are a lot of non-basic lands in Chris's deck. So this might be an effective time walk, even if Kris doesn't have a way to remove it. Might even be an effective double time walk. But it looks like we do see a copy of Vanishing Verse hanging out in Chris's hand here. So might want to deploy that to go ahead and get the Thalia off the battlefield. So we can so we're gonna start with Decay, then we can play an untapped land, and then also play the Vanishing Verse. Very good heads up sequencing from Kris there.
Yeah, great sequencing and a great job using those spells now before something like Brave the Elements, which I think we just ripped off the top. A wedding announcement for Logan gets a nice little human in play there and can start rebuilding a battlefield. But for Kris, you've got to be really happy to see that as the follow-up.
Yeah, and this was kind of my worry about the wedding announcement. It's yes, that I think that card is decent, but do you think wedding announcement really competes with the amount of card advantage that Niv-Mizzet provides? So it almost feels like it's forced where you kind of have to bring it in because of how much removal that Chris has, but it's also difficult because I don't think you can keep up with the Niv-Mizzet with that card.
Yeah, I think you just have to hope the bodies and the anthem are good enough, and predominantly the anthem, and really hoping that the backside of this +1/+1 to all the creatures will swing things enough. But yeah, you're not going to win this game playing on the card advantage access very often, even with things like the officer we talked about earlier in the break. So we'll have to see what Logan has as the turn 2 drop here. Turn 4 2 drop. It looks like another Thalia's Lieutenant. That is a lot of damage coming down.
Yeah, that is a boatload of damage. The original lieutenant's going to get 2 counters. Everything else is going to get a counter, and we are just shoving the 2/2 attacking into the 2/3. Huh? Interesting.
Yeah, it looks like Logan's just accepting like, hey, like you're probably gonna have to go here. The Glyphweaver is dying. I wonder if it was blocking the 3/3 and just did the indestructible thing, and it was just kind of awkward because they're all together. We'll see in a second here with life totals. The wedding announcement is flipped. So now all these creatures are larger and in charger. So the Sylvan Caryatid cannot chump block anymore. So we're gonna need something like a Wrath if we're gonna stabilize this battlefield. We do see a Leyline Binding. Looks like it is on the wedding announcement. That's gonna make it so all these creatures do get smaller into turn here before Chris untaps. And Ripped Lane, I think, has a Niv-Mizzet Reborn. Let's see if this one can do something to really take over the game.
Also Bring to Light as well. So we're probably going to see Bring to Light for Extinction Event, and that's going to clean up the battlefield.
Yeah, Extinction Event, a pretty easy grab here. And yeah, all that work that we did has been undone. Oof. And
yeah, this is going to be rough for Logan. Now there is another wedding announcement, which is probably the card he needs here because it is like you said, just being able to present three threats, 3 attackers, and then also eventually get to the backside of it, which can make those into attackers. But in the meantime, here's a Niv-Mizzet from Chris, so we'll have to see how many
we got
cards
at least one
hits.
Dreadbore revealed.
There's that promo again. I cannot figure out what that promo is from the left.
I think it's a Triome. It looks like it has a mana ability.
You think so?
Oh, I think it's the Bant Triome.
Okay.
Final answer.
I'm with you.
The Triome game.
Wait, did you just tell me? Oh no. Okay, I was gonna say if you guessed that wrong, that's -1 for the Triome game.
Yeah, I would never be wrong. The Triome
game.
I'm goated the Triome game as we did get a Bring to Light and Dreadbore to hand here for Chris, and that is a big game because even if Logan finds something that could overpower the Niv-Mizzet or a Brutal Cathar, well, Bring to Light finds another Niv or just finds the answer to it and we get the Niv back.
Yeah, very, very true here. Yeah, this is going to be tough for Logan because I believe there was the other copy of Bring to Light as well for Chris, so that can maybe get another threat, maybe can get a way to answer the wedding announcement. So okay, Extraction Specialist, not a bad one here.
Gonna bring back the Dauntless Bodyguard and make it so it can get indestructible. Something like that happens. Does mean that Supreme Verdict is a less impactful card than normal, but Extinction Event still pretty high impact here. And
right, because you could Extinction Event the odds to get rid of this. Well, no, you don't want to do that because it kills your Niv.
Yeah.
So
we are going to bring it light for something here. This could just be a Valky situation. It could also be for some sideboard Haymaker card. It looks like it's Deafening Clarion.
Ew.
So this does 3 damage to all the creatures and can give creatures you control lifelink. That means that Niv-Mizzet's going to come in here and do it. But it's a damage removal spell, so Brave the Elements, make it so it doesn't do anything when it comes to damage. We will still get the lifelink for Niv-Mizzet, but it might not be worth it to attack. Chris says it is. Chunks in for 4. Logan down to 14. Chris up to 17. And a quick pass back return.
Notably, that bodyguard cannot attack because of the specialist ability. So, Logan isn't really representing any sort of lethal attack here. Let's I think we get it. That bodyguard should not be able to attack. So,
yeah. Worth noting, the Extraction Specialist is a lifelinker, so Logan is going to gain 4, even though the Dauntless Bodyguard should not be attacking. And then we're just going to play another Dauntless Bodyguard. This one can attack. I'm curious where this one kind of goes here. We are going to also see a card drawn off Wedding Announcement, and then Wedding Announcement flipping into the Anthem ability. We should have a judge here in a second. It should be a really easy rewind. Just, you gain 3 life. This creature's untapped. Call it a day. Heading over there. So we see Chris untapping.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a judge on the way, but hopefully we can get somebody to just double check on that real quick because I don't want too many things to happen like the last time,
Yeah, it looks like the judge just arrived. Was had a hand, from the outside come in and point out. And it's really easy just to miss these sort of things. We're coming back to us in the booth. We can talk about some other stuff here, but they're gonna get that figured out, I assume, really quickly. That one's an easy fix. Get a warning, gain 3 life, untap your thing, call it a day, get back to the magic there. But we do need to have a moment and have everything check in with the judges as we do. But Brothers War cards. We were talking about some of those beforehand. You were about to bring one up, I think, right before we cut to the game there because the ruling was over. Was there anything else you want to talk about? We talked about some of the other high impact ones like Diabolic Edict and Brothers End and some of the prototype ones. I know there was one you're wanting from Modern. I know it's a Pioneer cast. We can bring it up, your little Rhino friend.
Oh yeah, we want to take a look at.
Disregard. I hate rhinos. We don't have to talk about it on stream. You're gonna have to deal with it, Devin. You have one more round with me to try and get it in. We're going back to the floor. The ruling's been delivered. Looks like as expected, just like a warning probably. And now the creature's gonna probably be untapped or whatever. Shouldn't be that big a deal.
So you're saying I shouldn't just talk about how great Rhinos is, huh?
I mean, can you believe some people get on a plane, they fly to a tournament, and they look at their opponent dead in the eye and say, "Yeah, I brought rhinos today."
Yeah, I'm that guy.
Wow, that's whew. This is a safe place. This is you, me, and 300 of my closest friends. We can talk about it. Are you okay? What has you?
Do we need? We're having a rhino intervention right now.
Yeah, we're having. Well, someone had to say it, and it looks like there is maybe a little bit more going on here than we thought. We thought the ruling had been delivered, but it looks like maybe not the case. But let's talk about rhinos. Rhinos, I'll say it, Devin. Unplayable when Yorion was around. I think your deck has some legs now. How do you feel about that? Because this is we haven't talked that much before. We've interacted a little bit. How does this feel? A little come to Jesus moment right here. This is a safe place, by the way. Just because I disagree doesn't mean I don't love you. I'm just here to help you. I say these things to help you, not hurt you.
So the card that we, if we can bring this one up on the screen, the card that we wanted to talk about a little bit before, Mason rudely interrupted me and put some slander on the rhinos was Arcane Proxy. This is another new card from Brothers War. I think it costs 7 mana, but we don't care about the 7 mana part of it. This is a prototype card. For those of you who don't know, prototype, you can cast the spell with a different mana cost, and it comes into play. It has that mana and ability. So basically 3 mana for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you get to cast a spell from your graveyard, or I think it exiles and makes a copy of it that has mana value less than or equal to its mana value. So with something like Crashing Footfalls, you can say if you have a Footfalls in the graveyard, play Arcane Proxy, copy the Footfalls. So I think this is going to be, a pretty good one. Maybe you could justify the second copy, but the second one's, you don't really want to draw the second one too often. But I think the first one is pretty good, especially when you're fighting over counter spells on your Crashing Footfalls, where, in post-board games against something like a Murktide Regent deck where they have a lot of counter spells, being able to have more copies of that. And also it's good if you, for whatever reason, if you play a really long game and run out of Crashing Footfalls, then you just have this in your deck to be able to draw towards and cast the Footfalls in the graveyard. So I think it's going to be a decent one as a one of. But yeah, rhinos are great. Stop slandering the rhinos, Mason.
Well, I'll say this. This card, if you squint your eyes, it looks a little bit like Snapcaster Mage. You rub them a little bit, it comes out, you're there. But the fact you don't have to spend the mana and that working with the Cascade cards does have big implications. And like you mentioned, you get to cast spells later in the game. That's something too. But you might also just flood out. Games go kind of long for rhinos sometimes. And just playing this as a 4/3 and flashing back something like Prismari Command or anything like that, like a Fire Ice, right? Like that sort of stuff does matter. And it's a good fallback on the card. This card rewards you for playing Magic and playing your game plan, right? And that's really strong. When you look in previous season, if you want the cheat code, look for cards that reward you for just playing the game you want to play as is. And, it's a pretty easy way. Looks like the ruling has been given and we're fixing it right now. We're going to rewind to the point of the error. So we're probably going to see it's just an attack. We didn't have anything up. We were all tapped out. We're going to get hit for some damage and then we do it here. But let's jump down to the booth. Yeah, it looks like everything is the same there. We just missed them unwinding it. So the Dauntless Bodyguard, like we mentioned, untapped, +3 life for Kris Ward. And we are back to Chris's turn here. Who's played a Graveyard Cemetery.
Pretty easy fix. Now we'll have to see if Kris has something to kind of clean up this battlefield. We took a little bit of a time away, so I don't recall if Kris had a copy of Bring to Light in hand, but we're going to go after the Bodyguard here. Okay, interesting.
It looks to be the Bodyguard not tied to Extraction Specialist, and that includes the Indestructible and the can't attack one. So we are going to kill the Bodyguard, and we're going to get the token Indestructible, and then pass the turn back. And we are not attacking anymore with Kris. We don't have the lifelink like we saw before from Deafening Clarion, but we do have a 6/6. And the cool part about this 6/6, Devin, is you can name any color off Blade of the Elements, and it's good.
That is very true. You could even name white. The mono white deck braving for white against the 5-color deck. That's how we drew it up. But yeah, this is with Kris at 11, there's only 4 power that can attack here. You could see something like maybe sacrifice Shefet Dunes. If there's a land as well, you could go land, sacrifice Shefet Dunes. That would be a 3, 4, 6-point attack with something like a Brave the Elements. But yeah, this is oh, I'm sorry. There's the wedding announcement as well.
Yeah.
How could I forget? So it's actually an 8-point attack. My apologies. But yeah, not quite lethal even with land plus Brave the Elements. So we'll have to see where Logan wants to go here.
Yeah, and worth noting, Logan has double planes in hand. We're just on nothing. It looks like Kris is going to take Logan's wedding announcement again and just shrink the battlefield and not worry about the creatures. They're all checked by the Niv-Mizzet Reborn. We might even see an attack with Niv and then, play another Niv Legend Rule and have a blocker. Looks like we're just going to see a patch on the turn, though, instead to leave up some mana. But we do have Valki in hand since we're 1 land away from Tibalt. Cave of the Frost Dragon, pretty good pickup. That creature land might come up if we get into a racing situation where we have some way to burst through the Niv-Mizzet. A triumph for Kris, though. And it's getting a little hairy here for Logan.
Yeah, that is a second copy of Niv in Kris's hand, right? I believe.
I believe so, yeah.
Interesting. See, I if that's the case, I kind of wanted to see maybe an attack with Niv and then, like you said, post-combat, play the second Niv to Legend Rule, because you don't want to give Logan infinite time, because eventually you can see something like put a bunch of creatures onto the battlefield and set up a Brave the Elements. So, I'm maybe interested in that kind of play just to try and find some additional gas off of the second Niv trigger to maybe play towards that. So we're just going in here.
Yeah, we're blocking the Cave of the Frost Dragon. Looks like there's no Brave the Elements here as Leyline Binding comes down on Kris, targeting the Extraction Specialist. And that's going to be an Eat of the Cave. Take 1, Kris down to 10. Dauntless Bodyguard is able to now attack, though, unlocked from Extraction Specialist leaving. And it's time for Valki to turn into its true identity. Tibalt, the Cosmic Imposter. 7 mana for this super powerful Planeswalker.
Remember when they used to let you pay 3 mana for this in Modern?
Oh my gosh, that was a good Cascade deck. That was maybe one of the best decks in Modern history. So one of the modes of this card is you can +2 and you exile the top card of each player's deck. You get an emblem from when Tibalt ETBs that you can play cards exiled by Tibalt. You get -3 to exile a thing, and then -8 you exile all the graveyards and add 3 red mana. So that will let you just replay the cards, and you can use mana of any color for Tibalt's emblemed ability. Looks like we are going to see Niv-Mizzet, and I kind of like where Logan's coming from. Oh, we have a Gonjo on the Dauntless, on the Niv. Okay, yeah, we set it up. Now we have another Niv for Kris, but I kind of like this. Logan just trying to push through damage, knows that the clock is ticking, and is like, okay, with this Gonjo, I can kill the Niv and go forward. But Kris did have another Niv.
Yeah, now with the Valki downtick on the Adeline, you could even see something like, I believe, I want to say Kris played a land this turn, so I think there is access to 8 mana, so you could see something like tap 5 for a Niv, tap 3 for an Adeline, and just kind of keep going. Obviously, we could hit some stuff off this Niv, so I'll have to see what this hits, but I gotta tell you, Mason, these Nivs haven't hit that many cards.
I do wonder if we just played Elder Gargaroth, would it be that different? It'd be less.
These are just some chunky Mole Drifters, right? Just Mole Drifter with some bigger stats.
Yeah, I was about to joke that you might get less feature matches if you play 5-color Elder Gargaroth, but I think that's not true. I think if you're 3-0 with 5-color Elder Gargaroth, we're featuring you every time. So we do see a Shefet Dunes pop here as we see Logan is just trying to push through damage before Kris completely takes over the game. And I love these attacks from Kris. I know I mentioned it before. I'm sorry, from Logan on Kris, but you cannot win if you just sit there and wait. At this point, there's too many multicolor threats, too many things that you can't brave through, and you have to try and push through.
Right, you just got to get in as much chip damage as you possibly can. I'm not going to say the writing is kind of on the wall, but if Logan has any chance this game, like you said, it's just getting in as all this like small damage whenever he possibly can, and eventually trying to like set up some sort of Brave the Elements turn. But now we're who's the human deck now?
Yeah, Kris playing Adeline and Thalia off of the Tibalt effect and then smashing in for 6 here, making it really hard for Logan to actually win the game. even if there's like,
Correction, you said smashing in for 6. It's actually 7.
oh, if I'm Logan, I animate the Mutavault. No way I let that 1/1 hit me. And we just drew another land. So Logan is going to take the L there. And it looks like that's the end of that game. What an interesting one.
Yeah, that was a sweet match. Get to see the we got to see, I would say we got to see the Niv deck in action, but I don't really know if we can necessarily say that given how few cards the Nivs actually hit, right? That wasn't what they're intended to do.
Some people would argue we saw the Niv deck in action. And that is some of it, but it is kind of worth telling, right? Like, despite the high requirements to play that card, a 6/6 is really big. Drawing one card, like, often one of the best cards in your deck with things like Bring the Light with these removal spells, even just 1 or 2 is enough to actually beat up on decks like this if you stabilized.
Right, for sure. And okay, we're gonna take a live look in. We got some Izzet Phoenix and Mono Green Devotion. This is a time shifted match, and I want to say this is game 3. It looks like we have a lot of stuff going on here.
Yeah, a lot going on. So it's Izzet Phoenix on the left here for Chad, Matthew on Mono Green Devotion. And it looks like we have abraded the Unlicensed Hearse, but we were exiling some cards in response just to make sure, any treasure cruise or anything like that, temporal trespasses aren't that big. Anyways, Matthew untapping with a mountain of mana. Looks like we put a Cavalier on top here, maybe an Aether Gust, and now has Karn and Kiora and these Meteor Golems, and is looking to be in a commanding position while Chad is a little light on mana.
Right. Yeah, Aether Gust, maybe not the best answer to Cavalier, because you're just going to say, well, I'll just draw it next turn, It kind of buys you the turn that you need, so you don't have it cast this turn. But, it's one of those things where I'm just going to cast it again next turn. And we see, what was the 7 lands versus 2? So this is things are not looking great for Chad here.
Yeah, Matthew playing another Cavalier, getting another draw, found the Nykthos, big find. If we didn't already have all this mana from the lands, we'd be in a really good spot. As now our graveyard is taking up so much space, it's encroaching on where our hand would lie as we smash him for 3 with the Meteor Golem.
Yeah, I've seen battlefield encroachment, but I don't think I've ever seen graveyard encroachment, unless you're playing Dredge. I've seen some Dredge players. You ever seen those where they just fan their entire graveyard out on the? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I want to see some graveyard encroachment on the opponent's red zone, where you don't put it down towards you, but up towards them. Get that L up there, like you're non-verbal saying L, towards them. You gotta get the psychological warfare in. Anyways, Ledger Shredder, pass the turn.
Powerful turn. Chad's turn's not nearly as action filled as Matthew's, right? Just
yeah. Right. And it looks like we're pointing out, like, hey, I have the Nykthos and Devotion. I've got another Karn over here. I'm just gonna go get the Cauldron. And Chad's like, you want me to let me connive? And Matt's like, sure. And he's like, all right, you win. And that's gonna do it there for that game. Unsure exactly if that was the match. I do think that was game 3. That was game 3. Yeah. So Matthew, congratulations, moving on to 4-0 here at the NRG 5K in Fort Wayne. Congratulations. And Mono Green winning it every time we see it on camera. I guess it's only lost the mirrors.
That is very true. Yeah, I mean, it is, as we talked about, the most played deck this weekend. It is probably the best deck in the format, so not a ton of surprise there. But yeah, Mono Green doing very, very well. And maybe that's kind of the narrative here. We'll have to see if anything can dethrone Mono Green in our feature match.
Yeah. So we are going to take a quick little break here, probably about 5 or 10 minutes. It's about to be time in the round. We're going to get the next round set up for you. So, hey, if you haven't already, click the follow button. That way you don't miss anything on the action here. We're going to have, I think, what is it, Devin? 3 more rounds and then a top 8 all today brought to you here. So it's going to be really exciting to see all that action. So tune in, grab some water, maybe, go touch some grass. Think about how you're so happy you're not playing against Mono Green right now, and come back and let's watch some people beat up on Mono Green. I want to see it next round.